Balibrera, D. Matthews, and
I'm James Fisher.
And we are so happy that you came here tonight to spend some time with us to hear some beautiful words from Claire Skinner and Gina Balibrera. At these readings, we present the varied and skillful prose and poetry from among the second-year MFA creative writing candidates at the University of Michigan. Tonight, we'll be hearing poetry from Claire, introduced by Kevin Fawn, and fiction from Gina Balibrera, introduced by Eric McDowell. Now, you know the spiel. Before we get into it, I have to tell you, though we're down in the back cave, you need to silence your cell phones and any other communication devices, because it does something to me. It gets under my skin, and then I lose all of my sensibilities, and things happen that let you know that I'm from Detroit.
This is a reading. This isn't a murder. Let's not do that tonight. Oh, also, we'd like to thank some of the parties responsible for tonight's event and the program's continued success. Thank you, as always, to Helen Zell, whose extraordinary generosities helped make our writing and the celebration of it possible. To the writers introducing their peers tonight, to the English department and the faculty and staff, to the University of Michigan Museum of Art for their hospitality, to the Helmut Stern Auditorium staff for their technical assistance, and to Megan Lavad and Michael Byers, without whose leadership, generous advice, and sharp wit, none of this would be possible.
And at this point, it is more than fine to insert some applause. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Eric McDowell, who will now introduce Gina Balibrera.
Is this working? How about now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. They told me it would be on. Okay. Fine friends, I want to tell you about a cookie. If I call this cookie a strange cookie, I do so only with a certain amount of care. This cookie, actually 4 or 5 cookies, melded into a single cookie loaf at the bottom of a special waxy cookie bag, was dairy-free, vegan, contained a generous quantity of blueberries, and was made with lavender flour, giving it a subtly soapy savor, enough to cleanse the palate without making you sorry for your last swear word. I suppose if I wanted to, I could force a metaphor linking this giant lavender cookie and the novel in progress, The Volcano's Daughters, both creations of Gina Balibrera. But instead, leaving that task to your imaginations, I want to go back to this idea of strangeness, the weird. Recent events have given me some authority on this topic, I think. Last week, in an effort to maximize productivity by minimizing distraction, I asked a friend of mine to change my Facebook password for me so I couldn't log in. Thus, several times a day, I found myself, after checking both emails and their empty spam folders, on yahoo.com, where, without much trouble, you can find stories and videos belonging to their odd news feature. In the absence of Facebook, I've heard some amazing things about a Georgia man's $62,000 water bill, the professional wrestling cameos of that actor who played Mr. Belding on Saved by the Bell, and about a short man's unlikely revenge on high-heeled shoes in South Korea. Unlikely, unusual, strange, weird. He stole the shoes from wherever he could find them, at the entrances of schools, restaurants, and homes, and dumped them in local parks, according to Yahoo. Writers in this room may already be appraising this anecdote's potential for fictional representation. Well, you're in luck, because you couldn't find a better model for such an endeavor than Gina Balibrera's prose. In a blog post for MQR last spring called Unnecessary Mangoes, Color Me Weird, Gina meditates brilliantly on her complicated relationship to the strange. In her post, she admires writers like Leslie Tenorio, a reader on this stage last year, whose magic resides not in the strangeness of the events he writes about, but in the hidden emotional beauty of his characters. Still, even the best writers who engage with the weird put themselves at risk, as Gina says, of having that emotional humanity of their characters overlooked or simplified because of their story's strangeness. Yet, how else to tell the story, Gina asks? How can writers of color write about authentic human strangeness without being dismissed as merely strange? Gina's fiction, through a certain kind of restless self-awareness, occupies this tight space between the weird or unlikely and the true. In the first chapter of The Volcano's Daughters, which you're about to hear, watch for the way that the harmony of her narrator's voices, yes, 4 dead girls telling the same story together, shifts into disharmony when the stubborn Lourdes disagrees about a scene in which a cloud of butterflies attacks a man from the Capitol. That never happened, she insists. How do you expect anyone to believe this nonsense? And later, in chapter 2, Angelica's mother swears that she's never seen her daughter's face change, though Angelica herself knows it has. And again, in one of my favorite scenes, Angelica and her mother visit Madame Esmeralda, a visionary fluent in ancient rites. Mother and daughter sit on cushions in Esmeralda's parlor, holding hands, their eyes closed, while all manner of otherworldly sounds rove about them. Then, when Angelica finally permits one naughty eye to crack, she knows for certain that Madame Esmeralda is nothing but a crock of shit. Still, this ingenious shifting back and forth between the strange and the true means little without, as in Tenorio's stories, an ore of emotional humanity strong enough to take whatever shape Gina chooses. Leaving the underwhelming visit with Madame Esmeralda, Angelica sees a long wrinkle carving the skin above her mother's brows and reads in this a sadness she had never noticed before in her mother's face. Heartbreaking, now in the arena of authentic emotion, more magic has been dispelled. But the magic of Gina's fiction is less like that big lavender cookie than like those attacking butterflies. Beautifully shimmering, yet not without violence, always shifting, never quite settled, and wonderfully weird, but absolutely conceivably possible. It's some of the strangest, truest stuff I've ever read, not to mention delicious. So please join me in welcoming my fine friend, Gina, to the stage.
Hi there. Can you hear me? Thank you so much, Eric. That was such a beautiful introduction. And you're such a great friend. And thank you so much to everyone that's here tonight. I'm so happy to be in this program. So inspired by all of you. And thank you. I will read from chapter 1 of my big work in progress. It's called Tacuba, 1923. Our mothers listened to radio piped in from the Capitol and smoked hand-rolled cigarettes in the coffee fields and never washed the black dirt from under their nails. And we knew the girl with violet eyes who lived 100 years. Graciela de Los Angeles might have been a living saint. We remember the mornings when we were all young, walking with Graciela on our way to school as the sun became heavy, how we would feel her body charging the air like rain. Together, we sat in hard metal chairs in rows, and the gringa nuns taught us how to read. Our mothers told us that after Graciela was born, the women passed her around the sorting room like a sack of yuca. She never cried. What a baby, they would say as each one took her body in turn. What a baby. Her mother, Socorrito, would set Graciela, fat and plumb-lipped, on the floor, as Socorrito and our mothers sorted out the coffee berries to dry on stretched muslin. The rest of us, we were told, stayed strapped to our mothers' backs, watching Graciela. When they let us down, we crawled over each other to cup her face in our tiny hands. We didn't remember that part, but we've heard the story told so many times that we believe it. There are parents in the field, and we're always listening. Our names are Lourdes, Maria, Lucia, and Cora. But we're here to tell what really happened to Graciela when she was small. Before the contests and the massacre, before she became famous, before she married that husband of hers. We know these woods well. Before this forest became El Parque Nacional Bosque del Imposible, these woods belonged to Graciela. She and her mother lived inside a shack a half mile from where we sit now. Now the petroglyphs are marked by signs and translations, and slick footbridges accompany each waterfall. You can take a tour, climb tired, silent Izalco. Let us be clear, we've been dead for nearly 80 years now, but we never forgot a thing. And we come back sometimes. We wait until someone asks for us, and even then, we return just for a few moments. Most of the time, we return here to the forest, just a mile from where we were raised. Sometimes we return to the village, and we find ourselves in plastic chairs in the front porch of a familiar feeling house with white peeling paint. Some of the people who live here now are kind enough to live us las onces. A little juice, our sour green mango with chili and salt, Gusa's heap with curtido. We say hello in the market, sit on porches and wave to the neighbors, but we're not really here all the time. We're the lucky ones from our village. The others can't move like we can, and we attribute our fortune to Graciela, of course. Well, can you really call it fortune? You must forgive our digressions. Sometimes the memories come to us too quickly, especially during the first few hours we are back. Most of us were 18, Maria only 16 on the day of the massacre. The men touched down on our town just for a day, like a storm. On the day of the massacre, Maria was counting chicken eggs outside the finca. Lucia had just turned on the radio inside the sorting room, and Lourdes, ignoring the basket of berries left to separate on the mat, had just begun to dance. Cora was scrubbing the basement stairs of the convent. We had lived through earthquakes and mudslides, the eruption of Izalco even, but not those men from the capital, burning everything to the ground. They were set on killing each one of us. But Graciela escaped, and since then, she's been helping us to come back. We watched the years as they passed, from the trees, from the sky, on the backs of birds, and from the silty bottoms of coffee cups. For 40 years, we watched El Gran Pendejo in his palace in the capital, pruning in that marble bathtub, spouting his nonsense like a whale. A few times, he invoked us with his thoughts, and we sang into his ears at bedtime, hoping to frighten him to his death. And when his chauffeur stabbed him during his lush Honduran exile, shattering El Gran Pendejo's twilight years of guayabera shirts and teenage concubines, yes, we saw that too. When we are here, our bodies return to us. Those you can see, we're not young anymore. Our bodies keep getting older. Would you believe that we are nearly 100 years old now? We return and compare our breasts as we used to in life, though they're lumpier now, like bags of grain. We rub each other's backs, which ache as soon as we enter these bodies, and we trace where the veins have risen through our papery skins. You would think that our faraway bodies would have broken down. Who knows if we'll return one day and our skin won't be waiting for us. But returning to our bodies, even for a few hours, even though they're ancient and worn, it feels good. Over the century, we've learned all the dances since we've been gone. Las cumbias colombianas, el chouk, la rumba, el mambo, el baile de torito, la chancuchona, la bachata, las merengues nuevas, las salsas nuevas, I didn't want a roque, but los bailes de reggaeton, por favor. That one we cannot do without laughing. But again, we digress. We remember the way that Sister Infanta tipped the point of Graciela's chin up with the ruler and stared, as if the nun knew everything we couldn't yet understand about Graciela. And the afternoons, when we washed our faces beside Graciela, the water turning holy as it ran over her skin, and Graciela's hair swinging on her back in silk ropes when we filed downstairs for Latin. And we remember that night in 1923, yes, the night we first discovered the properties of Graciela's magic. We slept all together in the sorting room, the only place large enough to contain us, and only on the most special occasions our mothers let us stay there, on the floor of the darkest room of the finca. In that same room, our grandmothers had been the last to ferment indigo into a bubbling amber tea. Our grandmothers had purplish hands, and a scent of piss hung over them from the indigo. The marks and the acrid smell of indigo remained on their bodies for years, even though coffee had come in, and the viejas had stopped working indigo long before we were born. Not too long after the massacre, and after Graciela had released us to hover over our world, a gringa wrote a poem. Cora remembers it. Recite that one part for us, please, Corita. Okay. Many escaped at night to eat poison roots or hang themselves in the forest. Yes, those were our grandmothers. All our lives, we saw the high beams and the sorting room stained with a violet sap, and the thick, ancient smell of indigo vats remained in our noses, reminding us of our grandmothers, mixing with the rot of coffee berries softening from their stones in piles heaped by our mothers. What were we saying? Ah, yes. 1923, our town, on the night we remember sleeping in the sorting room all together for Lourdes' birthday. We were all 9 then, except for Maria, who was still 7. The finca owners didn't care if we stayed, as long as we were out before our mothers arrived to work. We played the radio low, turning the dial through soft fuzz until we heard the silver strains of Cadena Panamericana. A love song poured out, heavy with strings and a tragic accordion, a song about finding the beloved, after years and years of betrayal, after exile, and after ruin. We'd heard our mothers sing the song. We parroted its words and gazed into each other's eyes lustily. Dicen que te arranca de mi vida, arranca de mi vida. Tear you out of my life by the roots. Something strange happened when the song came on. We turned to our Graciela all at once. Somehow we knew, at that moment, to look into the face of our friend, a friend we loved because our mothers had picked coffee together since they were our own age, a friend we had grown up beside, our friend because the Gringa nuns had come to our town when we were small and opened a school for us, and whom we knew because she was like us, skinny legs and scabbed knees, long heavy hair and torn dresses and dusty feet. But in the moment the song came onto the radio, Graciela's face changed, and we all knew to look. Days later, Maria would say, Graciela's face became sterner and her hair shiny and straight. Lucia saw lightning pass across Graciela's face, but there was no storm that night. Cora said again and again that Graciela became a sleek, amber-eyed cat. None of us believed her, but Lourdes was certain that Graciela had, for just a moment, actually become the silvery voice on the radio, La Güerita del Norte. I still remember her, Lourdes says now. Her face got long like it was being pulled by invisible hands, and her skin went white. None of us had seen the face of La Güerita del Norte. We'd only heard her voice, crystalline and rich, on the radio our mothers shared, and that was enough to imagine her. Pearly skin over wide, high cheekbones, a glossy widow's peak. We had argued about the details, long curls in a low bun or a waved bob, a siren's full red lips, or the sleepy lids of a jele. But there she was in our minds. And what Lourdes saw in Graciela's face at that moment was the face she had always imagined as belonging to La Güerita del Norte, a shiny-haired güera with pale eyes. On the radio, we listened to a note held long. Little girls at this age, you know, they make things up. They see things that aren't there. They dream with such certainty. They imagine betrayals and romances. They resent secrets. But we've had years to compare notes. After the song ended on the radio, Graciela was herself again, unremarkable like the rest of us. Though we suppose whatever that meant was different to each one of us. What had made her features shift? A trick of the light or the song? Could she change our faces too? Lourdes thought so. Make me look like La Güerita del Norte, Lourdes said. Lourdes had long, brittle hair that tangled at the ends, and her sister Maria took a machete from the cupboard and set to work fanning out her sister's hair, determining where to make the first cut. Later that night, when we were all falling asleep, Lourdes' hair lay in piles like dull branches around our bodies, and Graciela told us about Duende. He's about this tall, Graciela said, stacking her palms, fingers to the base of her wrist, and he comes to the window and says a little prayer. Liar, Lourdes said, though even then she had a feeling that Graciela was not lying. What does he look like? Asked Cora. After pausing a moment, Graciela pressed down on her nose and said, like in the puppet show that visited from the capital, a face like rotten fruit, but nice. Buccinella, these puppets were called. Remember this strange word later on, when the same troupe came over our mountains and performed for children who were not our own. We had heard of Cipitillo, the dwarf with backwards feet and an appetite for ash, and we knew the danger of La Bruja's wagon full of headless skeletons, and the duendes came to the windows of beautiful women to bully them with hideous noises. But we'd never seen evidence of this world until that night with Graciela. But then, what did we know of evidence? Graciela rolled over on her back and placed her thumb to her heart, like in the stained glass window from the Stations of the Cross. It wasn't just that she was beautiful. That we understood. The rest of her story we still don't. We fought sleep that night, took turns tickling each other to stay awake and see the duende. But sleep came anyway, the feeling of stepping down too far in a phantom stare, the stomach's pit dropping. In the morning, Maria swore she met the duende. He kissed me on the lips and used his tongue. Mentirosa! Lourdes shouted, awakening Graciela, who lay beside her. And when Graciela opened her eyes, Lourdes shouted again, "Ay, they're purple!" Which woke Lucia up. And dutifully, Lucia began to scream. Lucia's screams woke up the rest of us. Rubbing eyes, we began to follow Lourdes' commands. "It's too dark in here. Get some light so we can see better." After locating a match, we held it to Graciela's right eye, and then to the left. We dragged Graciela outside and had her lie on her back, her suddenly violet eyes open to the sun, rising in pink strips over the western volcanoes. We took turns straddling her ribcage, rubbing our noses against hers, seeing our eyes mirrored in her pale ones. Graciela, the most ticklish of us all, laughed and laughed. Just behind our tumbling bodies stood an immense ceiba tree that had grown for 500 years. The tree's vast, unruly branches held thousands of birds, which Cora had always been the best at spotting. She taught us their names: red-throated parakeets, jewel-bright, needle-nosed, green-striped virreos, puff-capped cedar waxwings, fat pheasant cuckoos, yellow-legged shining honey creepers, dazzling violet saguroings, cheery white-collared manakins, and dozens of torogoses, the clock birds with pendulous heliotrope tail feathers. We've always called their ceiba home, the clock tree. Each day, after the sun has risen fully, the birds fly from the tree in thick packs, tearing bright, shrieking arcs across the morning sky. And in the evenings, the workers go home after the birds return to their tree for the night, in the same rush of brilliant bodies. Las viejas, our grandmothers, used to say that our ancestors grew from the roots of the clock tree. And funny enough, sometimes we return at the foot of the ceiba, awakening in our decrepit bodies beneath a canopy of dozing birds and wide green leaves. The birds were leaving the ceiba tree now, and from the hill by the finca's sorting room, where we tumbled with Graciela, we could see our mothers walking in a line over the hills to the fields. After we had tucked on our uniforms and kissed our mothers, Lourdes and Maria's mother showed her displeasure with Lourdes' haircut by giving each girl a perfunctory slap on the bottom. And we had slugged down our breakfasts of coffee and powdered milk that our mothers shared with us. We began the walk that wound down through the village to the school inside the church. "How did this happen to your eyes?" Lourdes demanded of the morning air. Cora linked arms with Graciela, and the two began striding ahead of the rest of us. "Your eyes! Last night they were just black," Lucia said, running up to Graciela and Cora. "Well, dark brown, like coffee beans," Maria said. "And now," Lourdes said. "And now they're purple," Lucia said. "Well, mostly still brown," Maria said, "but with a little bit of purple, around the outsides of the brown, and gold, threads of gold." And Graciela only smiled, bright birds soaring from the ceiba behind her in the wake of her new morning space. All that day at school, the ladybugs landed on our hands and feet. We counted 17 of them crawling through Lourdes' hair through the catechism. A bright orange one landed on the nun's forehead. 3 ruby reds clustered on the chalk that Graciela used to trace hopscotch onto the compacted dirt in the schoolyard. The ladybugs fluttered onto the waxy pages of the hymnal Cora and Lucia shared in the pew, bright vermilion gems, as if they had been scattered by La Virgencita herself. We smiled up at her white stone face from our hymnal and marveled at the ladybugs that moved with slow solemnity over her motionless face, coloring her holy cheeks like rouge. Surely we had seen some miracle, but exactly what the combination of the duende and Graciela's changing face and the ladybugs meant, we couldn't place. At home, the sisters Lourdes and Maria would fight over what Graciela looked like. On occasion, her looks changed overnight, but it seemed equally true that Graciela's face changed all the time, in accordance with who saw her. Even then, we sensed Graciela's face did not change for any of the reasons you might guess. Her face was not a veil for her sexual awakening, and she wasn't a reincarnation of La Virgencita, nor was she particularly moved by the scent of juicy mangoes. Graciela was our friend, a girl like us, and as we got older, we became better at understanding Graciela's strange properties. To Lourdes, Graciela would most often be fair-skinned and black-haired, with eyes at the center of a flame. See this? Lourdes would ask her sister Maria, hitting a matchstick against its box. Mira! Lourdes would scream, jabbing her finger at the dancing purplish center of the flame. Maria would shake her head, and Lourdes would protest her sister's protest, and the girl's mother, Rosario, would run into the room. Enough! Rosario would shout, louder even than Lourdes. Give me those! Rosario would snatch the matchbook from her daughter, a matchbook that she had taken as a souvenir years before from a hotel in the capital where she had spent the night with a man who might be the father of Lourdes, or of Maria, or of them both. Our mothers told us about the fathers of our friends, but never about our own. Her skin is this color, Maria would say, after their mother had gone outside to pull up yucca or feed the chickens. Maria would point to a burlap sack hanging on a hook beside the front door. This color, and her eyes, like this, she would say, pointing to the iron skillet over the fire pit. At the center of the skillet was a faint rainbow left by soap and grease. Despite her recent exertions, Lourdes strode calmly to the burlap sack and then to the iron skillet to examine these items against her memory. But how? Lourdes would ask. Finally, more quietly, how could it be? Whispering now, the sisters would ask each other, are you sure her nose is like this, and not like this? And her eyes? I'm sure they're purple, but mostly black and gold. All right. But what's important is that they're different than before. They're different than yesterday. How puzzling to have a friend whose face was always changing. In any case, we all agreed. Graciela was the most beautiful girl we had ever seen. And so it was that we came to love Graciela all the more. Her earthly kindness was to us a precious daily gift. We made solemn vows to her of friendship, of secrecy, of devoted attendance, of protection, of eternal fidelity. Absurd. Miraculous face or not, most of the time she was just another child. Two rabbit-like new front teeth with jagged edges, rosebud breasts, black rainforest dirt rubbed deep into her elbows and knees. In the classroom, nervous tears had streaked her face twice that year, and she struggled with multiplication. But this wild love is the way of young girls. We fought each other for primacy. We pushed in the line outside the chapel to share a pew with Graciela. We crowded her in the playground at lunch, offering her tastes of candy we had stolen to impress her. We took turns braiding her long, sticky hair. We routinely followed her home deep into the forest, and once we nearly fought a stranger in her name. We first saw the strange man one afternoon when we were pursuing Graciela down the path she took home from the schoolhouse. The man wore slick black shoes and a curl that fell over his forehead. He could be from nowhere but the capital. The man was following Graciela, just like us, but more rapidly. Graciela knew that we followed her home. She was never surprised when she arrived home and we fell from behind ferns and vines to greet her. But when Graciela noticed the strange man, she began to run. We followed, racing through the trees, and we saw Graciela run to her shack and shut the door behind her. The plants snaking across the shack's tin roof rattled their tendrils. The strange man from the capital wasn't far, and we watched sweat soak through his linen shirt. We threw rocks onto the path, not to hit him, but so he knew we were hidden in the trees, watching him as he approached the shack. He did not slow, and the rocks made puffs of dirt rise up around his feet. From the dense green, we dared him to turn around under our breaths. It was autumn, and the monarch butterflies, resting in our village for a few days on their way farther south, glinted from the vines, making a golden wall of eyes. The man called to her by a full name we had never before heard, Graciela de los Ángeles Mendez y La Rosa. Lourdes doesn't remember the part that comes next, but she never remembers anything. In a breath, the monarchs began to lift from their vines. They slowed the opening and closing of their wings as if listening closely to the name. The strange man pounded on the door of Graciela's house, screaming the name again until a vein bulged in his neck. From the forest, we watched him and emptied our pockets of rocks. He spat into the dust and pounded again, harder this time. We looked to each other. Should we scream, beat him with our fists? We were children, scrawny fools. The man glanced over to where we were hidden in the trees and spat into the dust again. We began counting to 5. 1, and we made fists. 2, and we crept forward with the green on our haunches, surrounding the strange man in the half moon. 3, and we looked to each other and decided with our eyes that we were prepared to hit him with our fists and kick him hard, that we would gather tight around him and he would fall beneath our bodies. We were certain our plan would work. And then the sky darkened, too fast to be clouds. So we looked up. 4, the butterflies carried themselves to the house where Graciela and her mother lived. At first, they landed gently on the window frames, the door, the roof, the walls, and hovered over the man's body. And then, with their multitude's force, like falling water, they poured over the house and the strange man. Earlier that week in school, Sister Infanta had shown us a picture of a North American beekeeper covered by a thick, crawling swarm, each tiny leg tapping like a clock's gears. And we watched the man cough and sputter without the beekeeper's veil to protect him from the butterfly's furry legs. The butterflies darkened the strange man with their gathered weight, and the sound, we remember the sound as a trapped bird, flapping without control, too close to the ear. No! Now we pause and look at Lourdes. Her arms are crossed, pressing against the heavy breasts that should have nursed 7 babies. Lourdes is still so stubborn and straw-haired, always shouting. She never agrees to this part of the story the way we tell it. Let us explain. We've heard her tell it over the years, and it's not much different. But there were some years when she changed the story all the time. Oh, please, come on. Las maripositas de Dios, por favor. She stands up and brushes at the bottoms of her feet before slipping them into her sandals, as if preparing to leave the bench where we sit. We must be careful to remind her gently. Lourdes, lo pasó. How do you expect anyone to believe this nonsense, she says. Lourdes, you were with us, we say. Besides, how do you expect anyone to believe us if you keep changing the story? Why are you always like this? We say, let us continue, please. Fine, she says, rolling her ancient yellow eyes. Go on. We continue. 5. And the house was cloaked in translucent wings, glinting soft orange and black, opening and closing like light cast on mirrors. They rose and fell in ocean waves from the walls, lining themselves up in a dazzling choreography, never revealing the door, even as they crested and retreated. A dozen fluttered into each eye in making pairs, and he beat them anyway. But they danced over his fingers. 40 or so took turns gliding down to tickle his nose with gossamer wings. But that never happened, Lourdes interrupts again. Lourdes, enough, we say. She always does this, we say. It's not that Lourdes has forgotten. She knows what really happened. She's told the story our way before. In some of Lourdes' wildest versions, the butterflies are crows carrying rocks. Sometimes a white jaguar comes down from the volcano. Our red-eyed, pale-furred twin cadenas howl the capital man away. And sometimes our semicircle of fists drives him off. We bear with her delusions. The telling of this story depends on Lourdes' mood. The massacre was 9 years after the strange man appeared, and we always agree on that. It happened, we say. Cora remembers too, and Lucia. We nod, laugh, fanning the mosquitoes from each other's necks as though we share one skin. How else did she get away, Lourdes, we ask. Tell us that, Oh yeah, what do you remember, we say, taking turns to ask the same questions of Lourdes that we've been asking for nearly 100 years. We wait for Lourdes to turn her wide shoulders back around to us, the tail of her long silver braid hanging down her back like a stick broom. And then a long pause as Lourdes turns squarely and sits back down and takes a drink of pitaya from the sweating glass bottle. The juice leaves a fuchsia mustache above her lip. Ay, you are impossible, she says. So fanciful. Where were we? The strange man from the capital screamed words our mothers had told us never to speak, and then ran off. We watched the sweat shaking off his body, and slowly, slowly, the air filled with light again as the butterflies, moving in darkening streaks through the air, returned to their vines. Graciela ran to us, and together we watched the figure of the man until it became small and dark, a moving shadow. Maybe a week later, Graciela's mother, Socorrito, knocked on the door of Lourdes and Maria's house, and Rosario, who had just arrived home from the same field Socorrito had left, came to the window and invited Socorrito inside. Rosario offered Graciela's mother the cigarette she had rolled behind her ear, but Socorrito shook her head no. Lourdes and Maria watched from the stove as the mothers talked. Finally, Socorrito called Lourdes over to her, and then Socorrito put her arm around Lourdes' shoulder and nodded to Rosario, and she stepped outside of the house with Lourdes. Lourdes shrugged her shoulders and winked at Maria, who waited by the stove, watching out the window. Outside the dirt-packed shack, birds moved across the sky and filled the ceiba's tree branches with their colorful weight, and all the workers in our mountains knew the day was over and they could walk home. "Read this to me," said Socorrito, handing Lourdes an envelope that was torn around its edges. Those gringa nuns had the locura to teach us volcano daughters to read, but rarely did our mothers call attention to that fact by asking us to read something for them. And for a moment, Lourdes wondered why Socorrito hadn't just asked her daughter to read whatever was inside the torn envelope that was now inside her small, dirty hands. But Lourdes opened the torn envelope and pulled out a thick yellow rectangle of paper and read, "Méndez dead. We bless and remember his name. Send daughter Graciela de Los Angeles to estate, Colonia Escolar, the capital." As she read each word aloud in a slow sing-song, Lourdes worried over the telegram's meaning. Méndez, another strange man from the capital, and the name, the man defeated by butterflies, had yelled it as part of Graciela's full name. Her secret father? Who was this dead Méndez? Would Gracia leave our village forever for the capital? We couldn't know the fate that would befall us. Socorrito just stood there, frowning into the sun, her eyes blank, refusing to give up any answers to Lourdes. So the man from the capital, we would later understand, was not a ghost or a demon, but a bureaucrat sent into the hills to deliver a message, scared off by little girls and butterflies. Though surely he had seen more frightening things in the capital. The bureaucrat's message was sent to the finca instead and handed off to Socorrito at the end of the day in the fields. El terrateniente stood at the path, the air pinkening around him as he handed Socorrito the telegram, which had been opened already by a mother-of-pearl inlaid letter opener, clasped dagger-like at the lady of the estate. Coffee girls don't receive telegrams from the capital. What made Graciela and her mother different? Of that we are still not certain after all these years. And now, watch the way that our stubborn Lourdes nods, in a body that will disappear any minute now, a pitaya juice rosy on her lips like a trace of youth. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Vaughn, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Claire Skinner, my close friend and fellow second-year poet. Let me start off with a brief anecdote. Last week, I went for a walk. Tonight's introduction was on my mind. I really wanted to give Claire her proper respect, and I was wondering how I might select just the right words. Open to inspiration, I did what so many poets have done on so many occasions when in search of a breakthrough. I made a beeline to the liquor store. Browsing the handsome selection of wines, picking up the bottles, reading the labels, returning the bottles to the shelf, proverbial lightning struck. There, imprinted on a high-end red wine, the following embossed inscriptions printed, which I will read to you now. Notice that in the description, I've replaced the word wine with Claire. Our signature Claire delivers fragrant aromas of plums and dark berries, followed by rich, full flavors of blueberry, blackberry, and spice. It is a well-balanced Claire that will pair nicely with grilled meats, slightly spicy food, or rich, ripe cheeses. Indeed, minus the grilled meats part, we think she is a vegetarian. In many ways, this description seems appropriate. Claire is a woman with a naturalist focus. She has a Keats-like gift for describing natural cycles and human rhythms. Much of her work feels like a meditation on the earth, its history, and its people. These poems, agile, muscular, and graceful, introduce, then quickly abandon vivid and striking details. The flashing appearance of images is an unexpected delight, like looking up at the night sky and finding oneself in the midst of a meteor shower. They inspire wonder as they awe. Gertrude Stein has said that creative geniuses are able to simultaneously speak and be spoken to by the world. Stein seems to be describing the process of deep attention, listening and speaking, listening and speaking, listening and speaking. Claire, in her work and in her poems, has shown to me an ear that's gifted and receptive. Whether in our conversations between office hours in Angel Hall, in the hallways of Tisch, or in her creative offerings on the page, her sensitivity and warmth are always present. The feeling I get when I read her work is the same feeling I get when I read work by any true poet. I sense the presence of a beating human heart just on the other side of the words. Refreshingly, she is alive in the world with all 5 of her senses, and she is unafraid to talk about the complexity and richness of life lived along the pulse. Difficulties are explored, yet she is unafraid to acknowledge what's beautiful in the world. Her words are urgent and full of human intimacy. Maybe that's why her poems are so easy to trust. Floods are present, blizzards too. Lightning strikes, a friend dies young. She places a banana peel beside a kiwi skin, and this somehow makes sense. In her poem, Please, she writes, give me every block of ice, the cigarette, the match, the glazed cherry on its stem. There is light in her poems, and light, somehow mysteriously, sewn up in her words too. To give just one example of this light, last semester she returned a poem I had written with the following comment. This poem is such a spring end of daylight savings poem to me. It should be read in the sunlight to fabulous, mystical rock and roll music. Typical Claire. Always observing with discerning intelligence, tenderness, and warmth. I consider myself quite lucky to have had the opportunity to share a workshop space with her last year, and I've come to admire her innate lyrical dexterity, honesty, focus, rhythmic litanies, and above all, her friendship. Dear audience members, you are all in for an auditory treat. I present to you the best support I know for these claims, the poetess herself. Please give a thunderous welcome to Claire Skinner.
I wanted to start out with a poem by a different poet, the godfather of soul poetry, to me is Rilke. And so I'm just going to read one of his really short poems to God, a love poem to God, translated by Anita Barrows and Joanna Macy, to set the mood. So Rilke says, I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world. I may not complete this last one, but I give myself to it. I circle around God, around the primordial tower. I've been circling for thousands of years, and I still don't know. Am I a falcon, a storm, or a great song? And so that will be the epigraph of my reading, is I still don't know. Am I a falcon, a storm, or a great song? I feel that way all the time, maybe you do too. So the first poem is called What's Wrong? What's wrong? A cyst on the tip of an ovary, a cramp in the base of the skull, lightning stitching into the metal lid of a well, floods of course, and blizzards too, lost on Lake Superior in a leaky canoe without an oar, an orange orange peel and an apple's core shoved down your throat. An egg in Cool Hand Luke's belly. A snake beelining the burnt and crackling grass. A crack in the concrete, crack in the window pane, crack in the shield of a brave and virtuous warrior. The tear on his cheek, he shouldn't be crying. My friend's boyfriend kicked into rehab for a habit he said he'd been quitting but didn't or couldn't, or who cares, he's gone. An electric guitar, mother's ring, and Circuit City stereo pond, or the rainbow. Red, orange, yellow, blue, green, the easy way to categorize terror. Or the screening agent that morning in Boston in September who scanned the X-ray image and made Watcher an error. So a lot of my work has to do with September 11th, sort of aftermath of that. And this poem in particular, and it's kind of a riddle I don't actually know the answer to, so I just call it XXX. And that works. I am fruitless, they say. A black hole disguised as a pair of red dice, disguised as your aunt who died in the sky. I am the sound of that siren, the newspaper cutout of two towers, saved in somebody's keepsake box, under lockets and ribbons and pieces of cloth. I am the awful engine, your father with a platter of bad news, tenderness and terror playing across his face, a shivering animal covered in bloody lace, the electrical socket, the candle that won't go out, the moon with a knife in her mouth. I am both the bomb and the funeral song, a red-robed choir that wails on and on, the burning moth, the burnt. What's left? September 12th, 2001. Receipts, pennies, rubber bands, last night's salad, bean sprouts, a half-open can, icing on paper plates, banana peel and a kiwi skin, wildflowers in a median, a piñata beaten and torn open, silver crinkles, orange plastic, peanut butter on stubby fingers, rubble, steel, smoke, red and wilting roses, missing posters, tacks and staples. It was something like this. Blue day, gold dawn, once Anna was here, one day she was gone. What's gone? Baby teeth, bangs, pigtails, braces, Nike sneakers with purple laces, first kiss, tongue and all, truth or dare in a red-lit basement, first drunk, some brother's gin, first boyfriend, blonde and gleaming like a figurine, second fling, third, waitress shoes, smiling and standing and smiling, I'm ready to serve. My aunt's Marlboro packs, Christmas presents carefully wrapped, house across the street from the zoo, the wolves howled at nothing, birds in cages, endless calling, her laughter that I can't remember, God knows her crackling temper. What would I give? Me now 25, she still alive at 59. We'd split a bottle of wine, we'd call it dinner. Also, I want to say thank you so much, Dee and James, for making this reading series so special. I know we're all really grateful that you guys are hosting. So, switching gears a little bit, I'm moving into some poems focused on my grandmother, and this one is called Nursing Home. A foggy aquarium, a baby in a basket floating down a river, 10 million fireflies let loose on the moon. My grandmother on a sofa reading the same book over and over and over, and repeating the name of her first best lover, the man who fell backwards out of a window in San Francisco. Suicide? Whiskey? A black jackrabbit in a blizzard drinks the snow. On a sofa, my grandmother flutters, heart in the hand of the man who touched her shoulder 70 years ago. The night her hair got all askew, the time a very small pink galaxy spun lazily beneath her dancing shoes. what's forgotten? Day of the week, month of the year. Who's been introduced to who? If the coffee's hot, if the sugar's stirred. Holidays, birthdays, how to pray. Our names, if not lost and blurred. Who's been offered a Hershey's kiss, asked, and how are you? For my grandmother, the moon is forever full, crescent, or new. For my grandmother, the moon will never wax and wane. Harvest moon, wolf moon, moon with one eye winking. Time is somewhere out past the county line, waving his soft gray gloves. She can't lure him in. What's here now is the view. Charlottesville on to Appalachia, oldest rocks around. Once sky high and sawtooth and young. Remember, once Lord as fierce as they come. This is sort of the last poem about my grandmother. It's called Richmond. One hand in the sky, you, great-grandfather, fell off your black horse and fell off your black horse with a pirate flag liver and a leaky heart. Those were the days before pharmaceuticals. When you were afraid, you stayed afraid. Like a jaguar with a bullet in her paw, like a raft with a little hole. When you pressed your legs against the horse's hide, you rode. And when you crashed in the red Virginia clay and watched those luckless stars explode above your head, you couldn't feel a thing. And in that shock and awe ancestor, you became a hawk in a faraway sky, singing the safest song in the world. Last spring, I wrote a series of poems inspired by Petrarch, the poet from a long, long time ago. And he is obsessed with Laura, his beloved, who he's seen a couple of times, never consummated his relationship with, and spends an entire book called the Songbook, the Canzoniere, writing sonnets and canzones and sestinas to Laura. And I was kind of getting annoyed reading that book because I was sort of like, oh, Laura's a real person. Like, maybe I should write some poems from her perspective. But I don't know how to write about Italy many, many hundreds of years ago. So I put Laura and Petrarch, who I call Frankie, Francesco Petrarch, Frankie, I put them in Phoenix, Arizona, and the suburbs. And in 2012, and they're neighbors, they both have kids, they're both divorced, and they just have issues with relationships. So this one is called Laura at the Pool. Laura at the pool. Slather on the baby oil, readjust the shades. Here's what I do. Gather my tresses in one long braid. Then, no, I haven't learned my lesson. I wind it. Neighbor Frankie waters the orange bush. Neighbor Frankie waters the orange bush all afternoon. I braid, unbraid, I cannot help it. Oh dynamo, oh cherry fizz, oh oleander. I'm Klondike without the wrapper. This one's called Laura with a bottle of Pantene and a poster of Iggy Pop. Remember when she permed her hair in 1994? When it fell the length of her spine? When she leaned back, it looked like small stars exploding on a white sky. Laura in the garden. Bloom pink oleander until all I see are petals, trembling branches. You are the underside of a leaf, the cloud that frustrates the sun. When I bend to dig, to press a seed in the ground, you are the wind talking in tongues on my neck, the sweat that shifts from hot to cold, the secret life. And the you in this poem, I'm not sure who the you is. I probably should figure that out. But Laura watches TV. The secret life of rhododendrons, the secret life of mollusks, housewives, kitchen knives, the secret life of kites. Laura on the couch painting her toenails gold. Tonight the superstition freeway clogged past the 101. The TV sweet talks Laura to sleep, soft, softer, a moon all her own. Next door, Frankie does the dishes. Frankie cleans the garage. Frankie sits at his laptop, eating apple after apple after apple. Laura at the tattoo parlor. There is no way to draw the breeze, Oscar, her tattoo artist admits. Well, then put a cactus on my wrist, she says, and make it bloom. This one is called Laura at the Drive-Thru, and it has an epigraph from Iggy Pop, and Iggy Pop says, "I'm driving to my star." And before I read this, I want to say some thank yous. My horoscope this week by Rob Bresney. I don't know if you guys read Rob Bresney, but you should. He said I should be saying thank you all week long, and so I thought this is the perfect opportunity to say thank you to all of you. I want to say thank you to Eileen Pollock, who called me on April 9th, 2011, when I was waitressing and making a cappuccino at 7:30 in the morning in Tucson. And she called, and she's like, calling from the University of Michigan. My life has been totally changed, and I go back to that call a lot, and I'm just so thankful. I want to thank my dad, who flew from Virginia today to hear me read. I want to thank my boyfriend, Chris, for moving to Michigan. Thank you. I want to thank my professors here, who mean so much to me. Keith, Laura, Linda, Lorna, thank you for being my poetry, poem inspirations. Thank you, University of Michigan. Thank you, MFA program. Thank you, Helen Zell. And I especially want to thank my cohort and you poets for just helping me revise so many of these poems and being such wonderful readers. And I'm just so thrilled to be in the same class as all of you guys. So I feel very lucky. So I'll read two more poems, and this one, like I said, is called Laura at the Drive-Thru. A homecoming queen and a shy quarterback sip the same milkshake in a high school of dreams. A butterfly and a bird pause outside the Circle K. Both are orange. Both are unafraid. Remember when you weighed 100 pounds? Saved stickers, lizards, ponies, castles, before your parents divorced? Before your first tooth came in with a cavity? Before you knew you had enough? Skin, fingers, milk. Remember, won't you, before you were born? And this poem, my last one, is called What's New. And it's the you in this poem is my aunt, Anna Allison. So, what's new? A small white tooth growing from a 6-year-old girl's gum. Green grass under dry yellow straw. A blackberry thorn in a brown bear's paw. In 1953, whatever Jackson Pollock was up to. Snowdrops, daffodils, tulips, the young robin's polka dots. Consider the crocus, purple blood on a bedsheet, the cactus blossom dripping pollen, the lamb and his perfect heart, the beautiful sun pushing the boulder away from the dark. What they don't mention, he smiled. He was smiling, but the light in his eyes was bright but wasn't blinding. A week after you died, I dreamed you came back. I left to find the ultimate little black dress, you said. Did you find it, we asked? Thank you.